Okay, so now what we're looking at in front of us is sort of the completed process, actually, of mixing our tints for our pure hue yellow, right, for our color wheel. So here you can see I've put out another, this is the same sheet, right? You can see that is that lightest shade of yellow that we mixed previously, right, in the previous video. Here I have had to put out another pile of yellow, right, from my stash that I mixed up to begin with, previous to this. And let's see, I had, right, I had a nice pile of titanium white corner too. If I had sort of planned this a little bit better, right, with my positioning, I'd probably have a little bit more room through my palette if I keep the piles, a little closer to the edge. You don't want to go right on the edge because then that makes kind of a mess. I happen to have this page also detached right now because I removed it and actually had started mixing another color over here. So just normally I don't like to detach the palette papers from the main pad just because I think if you have it attached into the pad, that gives you a much more stable mixing surface. The paper doesn't slide around as you're trying to mix efficiently and quickly, but also thoroughly with your palette knife. So just putting that out there, right? Leave it attached. If you want to save things, right, just for reference, you can wait, you can detach them later, let them dry, just make sure that they're not going to get on anything, right? Or anyone, right? For that matter. Okay, so this was white, right? A pile of white. You probably want a fairly good amount of white. As you can see, I've used most of it. Let's see here, right? What I did is, I believe, let's see. Okay, well, okay, so here you actually end up having some swatches, right, that you can mix from. There will be some exceptions again for the tints, right? Remember, I asked you to cut and attach to your sort of your hue ladder. I asked you to cut out, I believe it was tints 2 and tints 4, right, of each hue, each of your 12 hues. And so, especially for the beginning, right? For yellow, yellow, orange, orange, etc. You are going to really be trying to match each of those tints, right? When you mix. One thing you notice here, okay, so it doesn't really matter which one you start with, simply because you have a swatch to pretty much match it as close as possible. One thing you'll notice about this as we look at this is what, tint 2, right? The darker of the two tints. So this is yellow plus a little bit of white. Your tint 4 is yellow plus considerably more white, right? A lot of white. So here you'll notice this is a pretty good mix. I'm really looking in terms of value, right? The hue, right, the color itself, right, this yellow that I have mixed up is much more what we call saturated, or if we look at those 3 dimensions of color, right, we have hue, which is this yellow, we have value, which is the degree of closeness to either white or black, and finally we have chroma, right, which is vibrancy, right, the amount of pure hue that's packed and the degree of sort of intensity. So this is certainly higher in chroma. It's more vibrant as a color. It's less dull, right? This color 8 swatch right here is, it's about the same lightness or value, but it's duller, right? So obviously when they were mixing whatever they were mixing for the tints, there's something else that's kind of a little bit different about that yellow pigment to begin with. Okay, so don't worry about that. You should get something that's probably a little bit more vibrant. You want to really match the values. So squint, right, when you do that, just to see if this is kind of becomes like a disappearing edge. If you squint, that helps to minimize the influence, of hue and chroma, and we really are focused on value assessing. Remember, this is wet, this is dry, so this will dry down a little bit darker. I do recommend testing patches, and I'll show you that in a second, right? Oh, you'll see my patches. So make sure you do test a dry patch next to your color aid. I think this will dry down a little bit darker and be a decent match for this. Here you can really see how chroma is affecting things quite a bit. This is still, I mean, it's obviously anytime you're adding a lot of white to a hue, it is going to drop the chroma of that hue down some, right? Because you are taking away hue and replacing its volume with white, right? Which has, you know, no chroma, right? It's the dullest you can get, right? So anyway, but I think because yellow is already such a light hue to begin with, just in its purest form, that even when we add like a lot of white, it's still pretty vibrant, right? As you can see here. Okay, so this is, you know, I'm looking for, again, that value match. Ends up being a little duller, a little more grayish looking right here. But that's not important. I know that I can't match, you know, I know that I have my yellow correct, right? And hue. And so really it's just a matter of adding that white. So you won't get an exact color match, but you should be able to get a really close value match. I know that this will be darkening a little bit. And so that should leave me in a good place for matching this yellow tint. Let's see, what is it? Is it yellow tint 4? No, oh goodness, maybe these are, sorry here. This is, oh yeah, it is. It's yellow tint 4, right? So this one was yellow tint 2. This is yellow tint 4, and I have a good match here. Notice quantity-wise, I have mixed up enough paint, right? I don't want to mix up like a lot more than I'm going to need. I've mixed up enough paint that it's going to kind of stay wet for a little bit, right? You still are under the, you know, you're under a time limit here, right? You want to have masked off all of your yellow family, right, wedge on your color wheel before you do, you know, you begin mixing the tints or the shades and the tints. And so you're all ready to kind of go here in with your brush and apply the paint, hair dry it really quickly, apply a second layer. Again, you're probably, if you mask really well and carefully, you should be okay taking a bigger brush, which can, you know, make sure it's a flat, and that can make that paint go on a little bit smoother and a little bit more opaquely from the beginning, okay? So that's the plan here. Let me show you, well, I guess in order to fully assess this, we need to test it first, right? Against, you know, along with the other painted little areas. I'll show you in the next image. Okay, so here, right, this is still on that whole yellow page, right? I have folded it from another, don't worry about the fold here, okay? So you can see, remember, this was what I had initially when I was mixing my shades, except it's just turned here. So this is my pure yellow, right? I guess I can probably rotate it here. There we go, right? Okay, so this is what you saw before. Here's that pure yellow hue area painted patch. Here was the darkest shade, right? We'll call that shade 2 of yellow that we mixed. Here was that shade 1, right? The lighter of the two shades that should sit visually in the value midpoint of these two. You could put a little bit more yellow in here, you know, and still have a good midpoint, okay? And again, we talked about making each of these a little bit more yellow and hence a little bit less dark, really. Here are my patches, right, of my lightest value, right? And then the yellow tint 2, right, that sits directly in between the pure hue with no white in it, and that yellow tint 4, which has a lot of white in it. Okay, and these should be, right, all of these, each of these, so my pure yellow, my shade 1 and my shade 2, my tint 1 and my tint 2 should all be lighter in value, than any of my other color wheel hue families. This is the lightest. So this will be the lightest of all of the shade 2 steps. This one will be the lightest of all of the shade 1 steps around as I move around my color wheel when I'm finished. Obviously the yellow hue will be the lightest of all the hues, right? All the pure hue families. And then the same, right? With this yellow tint 1 is going to be the lightest of all the steps in the tint 1 band around the color wheel. And the same thing here with the yellow tint 2. The yellow's version of tint 2 is going to be lighter than yellow oranges or than yellow greens, and so on and so on. Every single one will be darker, okay? So just, I hope that helps. The quantity that you're mixing up, you'll sort of get the feel of that. You want to mix up just enough to kind of apply it 2 times, and at least for the more opaque ones. And then, you don't want to have a lot left over because you don't want to waste expensive paint. Okay. I think this, and then, you'll just continue on through this process with your other hue families. You do want to make sure that before you move on, once you've painted out that wedge on your color wheel of your yellow family, you want to make sure that you hair dry it so you have it really nice and dry. Then you're going to mask off yellow orange right next to yellow. Don't jump around with this process at all, because that's when that will encourage mistakes to happen, and you want to minimize that. So it's really important that you see all of the shade mixtures and the tint mixtures as they compare to one another in adjacent hue families. So when I go and I'm mixing my yellow orange, I want to be able to see, okay, that tint 1 of yellow orange is a little bit darker than tint 1 of yellow, okay? And that shade 1 of my yellow orange is a little bit darker than my shade 1 of yellow, okay? And so on and so on, okay? All right, so I will show you yellow orange up next, the same process.